last night, in between flipping between Sunday Night Football, a bad Sunday Night Football game, some other preseason stuff, and the Hall of Fame, the Knicks had the most compelling thing of the night going against the Minnesota Timberpups. They ain't the Timberpups anymore because they went to the Western Conference Finals last year. Mm-hmm. Dante DiVincenzo, who I felt like you would have got along swimmingly with had he stayed around.
Was looking forward to covering him, yeah.
You had an excellent feature on him this morning, going back to when he was the scout for the Villanova team before they played Oklahoma in a national title game, and he was portraying Buddy Hield, and he tore up his teammates so bad in practice that it wasn't going to be a good look, but he prepared them so well. Like, that is the genesis of the story. But pretty much Dante was jawing at the Knicks bench during a free throw. You could hear some of the boom mics, saying some stuff. You weren't sure if he was talking to Tibbs or he was talking to, someone else. And then after the game, when everybody's exchanging hugs and pleasantries and changing jerseys, he's going back and forth with Knicks assistant coach and daddy of Jalen Brunson, Rick Brunson. Now, what do you make of that? Because I think Rick Brunson is one of those dudes that just gets on your last nerve for a number of different reasons. And he likes tap dancing on your last nerve. So once you are no longer in the jersey, I think some stuff just comes out.
Yeah, I haven't had the opportunity to really converse with Rick. So I don't want to speak on that, but it definitely seems like he's a competitive guy who was competitive when he played, and that carries that with him, right? And I think that from what we were able to learn, Dante jokingly, it felt like Dante jokingly made a comment at Tibbs at the free throw line. I think certain people didn't think it was a joke and took it the wrong way, and then that escalated, and then at the end it escalated into what it was. But to me, what I was told is like it was not as serious as it appeared. Mm-hmm. And I do think, to your point, like, I know it sounded cliche when Tibbs said after game, just two competitive guys, but it kind of felt like that's what it was.
Yeah.
And for those that don't know, Dante and Jalen are very close. Mm-hmm. I think they are best friends, if I'm not mistaken. He was a groomsman in Jalen's wedding recently. This has nothing to do with their relationship. I think it's a mix of misunderstanding, two guys being competitive, and maybe even some behind the scenes stuff that we are not privy to, but I don't think it's as
contentious.
I don't think it's as contentious as it appeared. I don't. Yeah. I really don't. But it made for an entertaining night. Randall did not play in the game. Cat did at 16 points, 16 boards. It felt like it did not feel like a preseason basketball game in there. Kudos to the Knicks fans. There's a lot of seats filled. Really good game, some good defense. Anthony Edwards had 31 with 15 minutes left in the game. OG Anunoby had a really good hot start. The Knicks defense looks legit. Minnesota looks like a team, even though they're still ironing stuff out, that has been through some stuff, and good ball movement, good sound defense. I think it was just a fun atmosphere, a fun game, and it's certainly. They only play each other twice, right? So I wouldn't sit here and say this is going to be like a rivalry of sorts, right? But I could see that game when they match up twice a year being a little chippy, just given the peripheral storylines there between Dante, Cat, now Rick, and the Villanova boys and Julius Randle and that whole situation, right? Where he's helping, doing community work, then 2 days later gets traded. Tough business, but I could see that. I could see that game twice a year being okay, this is probably must.
It's gonna have some heat.
TV. Yeah,
it's gonna have
some heat there. Good way to say it.
Yeah. It's like a wrestling term. They got some heat there. For one, watching the game at Madison Square Garden is an experience. Even when I lived there and the Knicks were terrible, y'all, terrible, I would much rather go to a game at Madison Square Garden than at Barclays. Now, granted, the 2 years that I was there, it wasn't like those guys were playing as meaning Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant. So maybe that would have changed it. But just the atmosphere of Madison Square Garden compared to anywhere else in the league, I'm not just bagging on Brooklyn, but I'm saying anywhere else in the league, it's a different sort of ball game And when you look at where the Knicks could be this year, like they've loaded up. And you wrote an excellent piece on Jalen Brunson when you first got there and was basically saying the premise of it was everything the Knicks are doing is built around him. That's not a first for them, mind you. They've had Patrick Ewing there. They tried to build around him. They couldn't find like a second star. They had Karl-Anthony and Amari Stoudemire was already there, but he was going to go into rapid decline with his knees and his back.
They had like Rashid and older Jason. Like they had just had a lot of older players around.
Older players. Like the Jason Kidd, J.R. Smith, Amon Shumpert, like those guys. Like they were cobbling together some successful seasons, but it wasn't anything sustainable. For one, Jalen Brunson, that's why I'm turning over to you. Jalen Brunson is like next in the Eastern Conference. Only Giannis and Embiid are built around in the same way that Jalen Brunson is built around. And those two dudes are giants. This dude is barely 6 feet tall. A stocky 6 feet tall, but 6 feet tall. What do you make of the strategy of solely building around Jalen Brunson?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And to me, the proof is in the pudding, right? Like there is years of data and observations to suggest that Jalen Brunson gets better every year he plays basketball. Even though we try to put a ceiling on what he can be or how much you can win with a 6-foot guard or whatever that is, right? The dude averaged 28 points a game last year with barely any space, like with not the most ideal spacing situation. 28 on good efficiency. Now you're surrounding him with arguably the best shooting big man of all time. 2 wings who shoot 40% from 3 and can defend the other team's best guard. Josh Hart, who I have a piece coming out on Wednesday, who's an excellent cutter and spacer in terms of just like understanding movement off the ball and things like that, right? Like there's a world where Jalen could average 30 plus this year. And you surround him with defenders who defend at that level. Like Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby are the 2 best wings in the NBA who have not made an All-Star game. Like when you talk about premier role players,
yeah,
like that's every team. We've heard about it for years. Every team was trying to get OG and trying to get Mikal, right? And they have both. So building around Jalen to me is banking on what he has done and who he will be. And I remember Becky Hammond, Knicks fans were obviously up in arms kind of about her comments with you can't win with a guard that smaller. I don't think you can. And like, while I'm not sure that I agree, right? I don't think that was like a terrible take. Like we just haven't seen it outside of the greatest shooter the game has ever seen. And Steph's he's over 6 foot, right?
Yeah, Steph's 6'3".
Yeah, exactly. Right. So we haven't seen that happen in quite some time.
There's 2 guards. Yep. The number is 2. For those who don't know, the number is 2. There's 2 guards in the history of the game where a championship team was built around him. Stephen Curry and the second greatest point guard of all time, Isaiah Lloyd Thomas III. Period. Though it's just it. Now you're telling me, I'm not saying you.
No, I know.
The Knicks are saying whether he's cutting that mold or not doesn't matter. They're saying we're building a team that covers up his deficiencies while also accentuating everything. Because someone made the point to me and says, if you think of Jalen Brunson as a 6-foot post player, he makes sense.
Yeah.
As opposed to a point guard that's just up at the top of the key, breaking you down. But if you think of him as an inverted post player who's also left-handed, which is a great advantage for him and a great disadvantage for defenses, then all of this makes sense. Like last year, after Julius Randle got hurt on January 27th against the Knicks, he averaged 31, 7 assists on 48% from the field, 37 from 3, 86 from the line. That's pretty damn good efficiency when you're playing for Tom Thibodeau and you don't have space.
Yeah.
Now, granted, we saw what happened on the back end and that 7-game series against Indiana where the Knicks' bodies just broke down.
They had nobody left, right?
And I'm very curious to see how that works, right? I'm very curious to see, because from a depth standpoint, James, you go outside their top 6, and I got questions.
So there's. Let me say this. Let me lead with love because I'm still getting acclimated to the Knicks fans, and I know how much they love their team. I think this Knicks team has a chance to go to the NBA Finals. I think they are very good. I think they're going to be a tremendous offense. I think the defense, at the very least, is going to be solid. I'm curious to see the Cat Brunson dynamic defensively, right? Like, I think teams are just going to put Brunson and Cat in pick and rolls and see what that does, right?
Yep.
So we'll see how that plays out. But I do think this is a team that very much could get to the NBA Finals. Now, what I will say, and what if that doesn't happen, there's two and a half things that I think are the reason why. One, the depth, right? Miles McBride is probably, I think that's the number 6 guy you're talking about here, right?
Yeah.
And bucket getter, scorer, more of a scoring guard than a point guard. Obviously, guys like Landry Shamet have shown stuff in their careers and are solid NBA players. And there's a world where Landry's like the best value contract. Like, there's a world where he's the best value contract in the league, right? Because of what he can do. Tyler Kolek, I don't think he's going to be in the rotation early on, but he's looked really good in the preseason. But you kind of made I think this is what I was trying to get across when the trade happened, and I apologize for jumping all over the place.
No, you got it. You got it.
To me, do I think Cat is a better player than Julius? I do. Do I think the gap is big enough that losing Dante makes sense for a team that's depth was kind of very pivotal to their success last year? That's where you kind of lose me, right? And I also think that for what it's worth, the grit, and I'm saying that as a Lions fan, that's our motto. The grit and kind of makeup of the roster last year that, one, helped them get to where they were, but two, it really endeared them to the fans. Dante and Julius are like dogs that fit that mold, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm not saying that any of the newest additions aren't dogs. Like, I'm not saying that, right? I'm saying that I know that they lost 2 dogs.
Right.
And guys that are gamers and that just have that kind of, New York and Detroit are similar, right? Like that, they're tough SOBs, Dante, and like we saw last night, right? Like, he ain't afraid of shit. But so that I'm curious about, like, when you get to game 6 in Boston or game 7 in Philly, like, do you miss that dog? Do you have that dog still? And I think they do have dogs on their team, but you lost 2 more. And then the other thing is, like, yeah, kind of I talked about defensively, like, is Cat gonna hold up when it matters, right? The pick and roll, teams are gonna spam pick and roll with Jalen and Cat. What do you do with Mitchell Robinson when he's healthy? Very clearly, the Timberwolves thought they needed to put a center next to Cat. They went and got Rudy Gobert, but I think the Knicks, if the goal is to build around Brunson, like, you play Cat at center. So I'm ready kind of for the season to start to see how many of these things like manifest. Because I think there are a very good team that does still have like some miniature questions that determines the ceiling.
It's multiple agendas and you're wondering, or conflicting agendas, I will say. And I don't mean agendas as in like a negative thing. I'm just saying agendas as in objectives and what a team wants to look like versus the team's reality. Mm-hmm. And you're building around Jalen Brunson, so you need space. But to cover up Jalen Brunson's deficiencies, you probably need a rim protector. Instead of a rim protector, you have, like you said, the two of the best defensive wings, long, one is strong, both are really good, that can sort of make up for that space. Are they covering up the space for Jalen Brunson on the outside, or are they covering up the space for Karl Towns on the inside? Mm-hmm. That is the question for me. Also, my concern is that this team is landlocked now. Like, they use some real, very sneaky and smart machinations to get Karl Towns. Yeah. Like, when you are over the first apron, you can't take out more than you bring in. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Or you can't bring in more than you send out. Yeah, yeah. And that was the case for actually both teams. So they wound up basically just facilitating some stuff, finding the third team and getting it. You won't be able to do that now to improve your team. You have your draft picks, I believe. Yeah. But now you've got Mitchell Robinson as the one sort of tradable piece that you have, but you have all these restrictions based off the CBA. Mm-hmm. And with him playing 31 games, 72, 59, and 31, and then being out through the first of the year this year, I wonder what type of appetite there's going to be for other teams to really want him if they need to improve their team through the year.
Yes, I agree with you. I think the writing suggests that if this Knicks start doesn't go as smoothly as I think fair to say we anticipate it going, I
Mm-hmm.
think that you'll hear Robinson rumors heat up, right? Even more so than they have been, because like you said, he is the most obvious trade chip if you're trying to improve the team. Now the question is, what do you use trading Mitchell Robinson? Like, do you just get another center, maybe who's a little bit more reliable in terms of games available? Um, do you address something else, right? Like, how do you use Mitchell Robinson if you end up moving on from? Like, what do you bring back? Because I think what I was saying earlier and what we've yet to find out is can this defense be a great defense with Cat at center? And if not, well, I don't know if there's anybody better other than Rudy Gobert that you would want next to Cat than Mitchell Robinson, right? So it's like you got to walk a fine line, and I think they are going to take these next few months to really figure out what it's going to look like. And it's kind of hard to put into words because we just haven't watched meaningful basketball, right? Like, but there's certainly things like you're suggesting that like there's miniature storylines to really pay attention to that could, in the end, like build up to something bigger than it feels right now, I guess is the best way to say it.
Yeah, and there's this, like, for one, I saw the Western Conference Finals last year. I was there. And so much of the attention went to Rudy Gobert and his deficiencies and how you tried to play him off the floor, and Isaiah, say Likely. But I think that's a Baltimore Ravens receiver.
That's
Lively, Derek Lively.
Lively, yeah.
Derek Lively the second. And how those guys sort of played Rudy off the floor, played Rudy off of effectiveness. I remember Karl Towns not having a great series at all when the lights got brightest. And there is no brighter lights, theoretically, than in New York City. There's national expectations for the Lakers. There's national expectations for the Celtics and locally, too.
Uh-huh.
But I don't know if there's a greater local pressure than there is playing in New York City for a Knicks team that has real designs on getting to the NBA Finals for the first time since 1999, the lockout season of 99 when they were 8th seed, and they beat the 8th seed, the top seeded Miami Heat in round 1. They beat Atlanta in round 2 because, of course, they're the Hawks. And then they beat the Pacers in the Eastern Conference Finals before they got slaughtered by before we knew it, dynastic San Antonio Spurs of Tim Duncan and David Robinson, right?
Yeah.
So they've been starving since then. And when you bring in Karl Towns and you bring in Mikal Bridges, the expectations are going to rise exponentially. And you're looking over at Philadelphia and saying, hey, man, you better be ready for Joel Embiid.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And we've seen those two have a history. So I'm very curious if Karl Towns, not from a talent standpoint, but just from the expectations of it and playing for a coach who they didn't have the greatest relationship the first time around. Like you and John Krasinski wrote a great piece maybe a week ago about how those two mended their relationship. But you can mend your relationship in the preseason, and then it gets really tested by the fire of the playoffs, and you figure out how well do we really know and like each other.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And I think that dynamic itself, and it's not just, I don't think it's just privy to Cat and Tibbs. Like I think that's in general, right? Like this is a new team, which is kind of I think that was my biggest thing with the trade, right? Like
too much change.
Yeah. For a team that I think we all agreed would have been in the Eastern Conference Finals if they just didn't get hurt. Like I'm not sold on the Pacers as others are. Like I think the Pacers are probably a team that's
you are a Tyrese Halliburton truther for those.
I like Tyrese. He's nice. Like he's a good player. I just don't I don't know if that team's as good as it showed last year. I think Miami's going to end up passing them. I could see Indiana as a 7th, 8th.
I mean, they also beat a Bucks team that didn't have Dame and didn't have Giannis in round 1.
Exactly. So my point is, I understand the value of the trade on its surface. You're trading 2 all-stars with flaws for one another. Like that's solid value given the situation, right? But I also just I don't know if that trade needed to be made. Maybe it needed to be made, and that was kind of what they've talked about. They needed a center, not getting Isaiah Hartenstein. But adding that team with Mikal Bridges and maybe and I'll just use a name, what if you just added like an Isaiah Stewart instead? Like, is that team, if healthy in the playoffs, like that team is, as you know what I mean? Like maybe that's all they needed was just health. Like I think there's risk in shaking something up that worked before. And only reason it didn't really work is for forces out of their control. Now you're coming in, new Mikal Bridges is coming in. Karl-Anthony Towns is coming in. Josh Hart's role changes. OG Anunoby's role might change even. And they didn't even really play with him, right? Like he got out. So, and then your bench is kind of mashed together. Deuce McBride and Precious are really like the only consistents there. So I think for Tibbs, like he's going to learn a lot about guys. I think there's going to be trial and error. And I think some guys, I don't really care for the word sacrifice, but there's going to be some. It's just going to be like I think it's going to be more of a patchwork than people think.
It's not. I don't think they're going to start and off and hit the ground running. I'd be surprised if they did. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Just like I was wrong for the Celtics in the finals, and they put me on that Summer Jam screen when they put together the mashup of all the people who got the Celtics going into the NBA Finals wrong, and they had me at the tagline. Right. Fine.
That's because they know you hate Boston too, the city of Boston.
I don't hate Boston. They got some great restaurants, some great chowder. But
you like clam chowder?
Yeah, yeah.
I know you're a picky eater. That surprises me.
Yeah, I like clam chowder.
Okay, that's surprising.
Yeah. And I went out to dinner with people who know Boston.
That's fair.
So you're going to like some of the best spots. Now, there are some other elements of Boston that we don't necessarily have to talk about here that are not as friendly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But by and large, Boston's okay.
Like Boston. Yeah, I like Boston.
Of course you would like Boston. They think you're one of them.
Shut up.
They do. They think you're one of them. Now, to the point, I think for one, Karl Towns deserves credit. Like I just talked about, I guess a not so flattering element, but I will close on this. In the Western Conference semifinals against Denver, he played really well defensively against Nikola Jokic.
He really did, yep.
Especially when Rudy Gobert was off the floor and you couldn't hide him somewhere else. Now, don't get me wrong. There's still a place where Karl Towns is going to do the bongos on you. And be like, man, Karl, why'd you do that? It's 10 minutes left in the third quarter. You just picked up your fourth foul. Yeah. But those moments seem to come fewer and further between when they used to. The big concern with me with the Knicks is health. Remember, Karl Towns missed time. Was it a knee?
Yeah, and his injuries I wouldn't call him injury prone, but he's had more injuries as of late.
Yeah, and then also OG Anunoby, who had the hamstring, like not too long after getting to New York, it seemed like he never really truly felt comfortable, and maybe that was free agency looming. I don't want to give up my leverage. I know I'm getting a deal, but I want to make sure that I keep myself upright. So you want to make sure that aside from Mikal Bridges, who's going to play every game, he'll play 85 games if you ask him to. Josh Hart doesn't sit down at all for some games because Tibbs is going to play him that way. I do wonder from a health standpoint about the Knicks because they are so thin up top and they have to learn each other in a very short period of time. Those are my biggest concerns for that group. But talent-wise, James, they will find themselves. Like this is a round robin, so to speak. Like there's 4 really good teams in the East. I think you would agree, right?
Yeah.
Milwaukee, who I think teams are kind of sleeping on because they've only won one playoff series since winning the championship. Milwaukee, Philly, New York, and the champion Boston. Like you can't avoid anybody, theoretically. Like you're going to find yourself in a game 6 against somebody that you don't want to be in a game 6 with. And you better be healthy and you better be playing smart.
Yep. No, I agree. I think that's an excellent point. Like I think you give the nod to the champs. Right? Like, they're the top dog, but then you look at those other 3 teams and it's kind of, you look at which flavor you like more or what appeals to you more as, I think, a fan of the game, and you can maybe talk yourself into one of them being behind the Celtics more than the other. But at the end of the day, I think Milwaukee still has the most dominant player of those 3 teams in Giannis.
Yep.
Him and Dame they didn't add barely anything this summer, right? But Dame and Giannis can still go. Sneakily, Philly has done a really good job of adding, while New York lost depth, Philly added depth. They add Paul George, they add Caleb Martin, they add Eric Gordon, they add Andre Drummond, who had a really good year in Chicago. They add Reggie Jackson, who's shown he can still go. They've added some pieces there, right? And then New York, you can make the case. I mean, Boston fans would disagree, and Knicks fans, like, you 1A, 1B for the best starting lineup in basketball. It's probably the Knicks and the Celtics, right? So, yeah, it's going to be fascinating. I don't subscribe or prescribe to the Tibbs works his guys into the ground, and that's why they get injured. Like, I just think his teams play hard in basketball, and things happen in basketball. But Mikal Bridges will be kind of like the ultimate test case, right? A guy who hasn't missed a game since high school. Like, if he, like, people, I can already see like the outside narrative being, oh, see, look, Mikal doesn't miss a game until he's with Tibbs, which I think is just insane personally. But that narrative will come if Mikal misses any game.
Well, I do, look, the confirmation bias is going to sit in with Tibbs no matter what happens. If Bridges winds up missing games at some point, it's not going to be because of the correlation of all the games that he's played in his career up until this point, never taking time off. It's going to be because Tibbs ran him into the ground, right? That's what that's what the narrative will be. Yeah, that's what the narrative is.
And I agree. I don't agree with that, but that will be what the narrative
is. And the thing is, all the individual cases may mean nothing. Right. I always say the micro creates the macro. All the individual cases is like, man, it's like there's a cop and there's always a dead body around. Man, how you discover this dead body? Like, you know what I mean? Like that sort of thing. Like maybe that's a bad analogy, but you get like the cop movies, right? Yeah, then you find out that the cop is like the dirty cop. Yeah. Not saying that Tibbs is the dirty cop, but you get what I'm saying from the standpoint of always his teams managed to break down at the worst possible times. It all stems from Derrick Rose, by and large. This conversation all stems from Derrick Rose, and we will never get that taste out of their minds, even though I think Tibbs has grown as a coach. This is a better offensive team than it is a defensive team. They're just playing like a better defensive team than offensive team right now. If they're going to win on offense. So I'm very curious how that's going to play itself out. But
I think Tibbs is one of the me and you are very, and I know we have to wrap up. Me and you are firm on Spo and Ty Lue being the best coaches in basketball. Yes. I personally think Tibbs is in that conversation. I think people forget that he's had top 5 offenses in Chicago, in Minnesota, and in New York. Like, the dude lives and breathes basketball, and I never hear a bad word from players who have played for him. I mean, listen, how many of his star players have wanted to play for him again? Like, that says something. Jimmy Butler, right? Derrick Rose. Now, like, Katz talked about it, right? Like, this is a thing.
Could be Stockholm syndrome.
Stop.
Just playing.